Snow lay in a thick, silent sheet over the village of Ash Hollow. The narrow lanes, bordered by tall stone row houses with soot-blackened facades, seemed swallowed by the fog of winter. The bell of St. Matthew's Church tolled 6 times, each chime hollow, as if the bell itself had grown tired. Young Thomas trudged along the frozen path, pulling a sled of firewood behind him. His breath came in heavy clouds that hung in the air before vanishing into the stillness. The town was too quiet. No voices, no distant clatter of wagons, not even the caw of a crow. His eyes darted toward the alleyway near the cooper's workshop, where the shadows lay thicker than the snow. He stopped, his heart ticking in his chest like a watch wound too tight. For a moment, he thought he saw something move. A long, bent shape that slipped from one shadow to the next. It was gone too quickly, like a flicker of smoke. He tugged the sled harder, the wood creaking under its own weight. Just a shadow, he told himself. Just a shadow. But he kept his eyes on the road ahead and his back to the alley. As he passed, the faint sound of chains dragging across stone echoed softly behind him. By evening, the snowfall had thickened, and the glow of hearth fires flickered like dim stars behind the frost-glazed windows of Ash Hollow. Inside his small, drafty house, Thomas huddled by the fire, letting the warmth soak into his chilled fingers and face, while his mother stirred the evening stew. She hummed a song he didn't know, her voice soft but hollow, as though she sang more to herself than him. His eyes remained fixed on the orange glow of the flames, his fingers tracing shapes on the side of his tin cup. Every so often he glanced toward the small window by the front door. The frost had thickened, but through the tiny gap of clear glass, he saw the black street beyond. Just snow, just night. But then, there was movement. Slow, deliberate. Thomas quickly stepped toward the window. A figure stood at the far end of the street, too far for him to make out the details, but close enough that he could see the crooked silhouette. A long coat hung from its shoulders, the hem brushing the ground, and something large and curling sprouted from its head. Horns? No, branches, maybe. His breath stilled as the figure tilted its head, the motion sharp, precise, like a bird spotting prey. He pulled away from the window, heart hammering. He told himself it was nothing, just a villager in a heavy cloak. But deep in his chest, something colder than winter had settled. The next morning, the village was a hum of unease. Word spread quickly that old Mr. Cartwright had vanished overnight. His door was found wide open. Snow swept inside in long streaks like something heavy had been dragged through it. By noon, 3 more houses were found the same way. Doors ajar, homes empty. No footprints led away from them. Thomas lingered near the old fountain in the village square, his sled forgotten. Villagers clustered in uneasy groups, faces pale beneath their wool scarves. Mothers gripped their children's shoulders too tightly. Whispers drifted like smoke from every direction.
"The old stories,"
said Mrs. Loring, her voice sharp as cracking ice.
"It's the nights of reckoning, and we didn't pay heed to it."
Others dismissed her as an old fool, but their eyes stayed on the woods at the edge of town. Thomas listened in silence, his eyes locked on the base of the clock tower, where shadows clung thicker than they should. From the dark, a shape emerged, tall and hunched, with something that curved like horns. It seemed to steal the light of day with it, leaving the air colder and the shadows deeper. His breath froze in his chest, heart pounding as the faint rattle of chains echoed softly on the stone. He stepped back, eyes wide, too afraid to call out. The bell rang suddenly, a thunderous crash that shook the air. Heads turned toward the tower. A second toll, louder than before.
It's not noon,
Muttered Mrs. Loring, clutching her shawl. The third chime echoed like a final warning. Thomas snapped his eyes back to the base of the tower. The shape was nowhere to be seen, just cold stone and empty shadows. His breath came fast and shallow, but the square was quiet once more. Normal, for now. That night, sleep came slowly. Each creak of the house made Thomas jolt awake, his ears straining for something more than the familiar sounds of the house settling. He lay stiff in bed, his blanket pulled to his chin, his eyes locked on the window across the room. The frost had thickened, and through the foggy pane, something moved. His breath stopped. A shape stood there, pressed against the window, its breath fogging the glass from the outside. It tapped once. A claw. Then twice. The tapping became a slow, deliberate scrape that dragged across the glass like nails on slate. The breath on the other side fogged in bursts, slow, steady, patient. Thomas didn't move. His fingers gripped the blanket so tight they ached.
It's not real.
He whispered, lips barely moving.
It's not real. It's not real.
His heart pounded so loudly he thought it might give him away. Slowly, the tapping stopped. Silence. He strained to hear, every muscle in his body tense with the effort. Nothing. Just the cold hush of snowfall. Slowly, he sat up, his breath shallow. He crept toward the window, knees trembling with each inch he gained. He reached out, fingers quivering as they brushed the frost-caked glass. He wiped it clear with his sleeve. Empty yard. Nothing but snow and dark. A breath of relief escaped him until he heard the creak of the back door opening downstairs. The next morning, the sun rose behind a sky of iron gray, dim and joyless. The village of Ash Hollow was silent again. No bells, no voices, just the slow, steady fall of snow. No one saw Thomas again after that night. His mother swore she'd only stepped away for a moment, just long enough to check the fire. When she came back, the door hung open, snow sweeping in like pale ghosts. No footprints, no tracks. The search went on for days, but the woods yielded nothing. People whispered of shadows seen in the trees. Shapes too large to be deer, too strange to be men. At night, the village barred its doors and doused its lanterns early. No one spoke of the horns they swore they glimpsed between the branches. No one spoke of the chains they heard rattling just past the edge of their hearing. Weeks passed, then months. Spring came, and the snow melted away. They stopped searching. They stopped speaking of it. But late at night, when the fog of sleep crept in, some swore they still heard it, just faintly, chains dragging across stone, slow, steady, patient.